All right, we're coming in.
It may not look like it, but this is a public high school math test. It's the first math test I've taken in over 20 years. And yeah, I suck at it.
So what grade would you give this horseshoe? F through A. Where would you place this?
F.
Oh, okay.
That one would be going in the scrap pile.
This experience is nothing like the test I used to take back in school. But here's the thing. Tests like these might hold the secret to a better way to measure learning than the tests that schools have used for the last 150 years.
Too many tests. That's the clear message from a lot of frustrated parents and teachers across the country.
So I'm a parent with 3 kids in public schools, and I wanted to understand why our education system is so obsessed with tests, and then ask a bold question. Do we even really need them at all?
Now, a new study is backing them up. It concludes that all that testing isn't making students smarter. It's stressing them out.
So I talked to experts from across the country and saw some of the most innovative approaches to measuring learning happening right now in our education system.
What we decided is let's blow up a system and give kids some control over their education.
All right, so this is one stone. Wow. I really don't understand how you can have a school run by students with no teachers. How does it work?
Round of applause for that.
It's nice.
On this journey, the questions that we want to answer are, why have schools used this system of high-stakes testing for over a century?
More than half of you failed.
And is there a better way to measure what kids are actually learning?
Why are you teaching AP math at a self-directed school?
This is correct.
Yes.
I have absolutely no clue how it works.
Well, what you can expect to see today is the very best of public education.
3, 2, 1, stop!
All right, let's go to school. So, like I said, I'm a parent, and I think something that all parents wonder is, are my kids learning enough in school? And as it turns out, the way that we measure learning is really, really old.
Oh, that looks like a taco sandwich.
Who wants a taco?
Okay, let's see how far you go, okay?
Now, it seems like tests have always been a part of school, but why is that? Where did testing come from? In researching this story, I took the opportunity to speak with Carrie McDonald.
I am Carrie McDonald.
She's an author and researcher who has spent thousands of hours interviewing educators on her podcast, Liberated. So when we use test scores to measure a student's learning or a school's effectiveness, what are we missing?
So I think it's worth going back and looking at the history of standardized testing in the US. Standardized testing begins around the same time that mass compulsory schooling begins in the mid-19th century. It was really focused on obedience and compliance and order and efficiency.
This was perfect for the Industrial Revolution because the US needed to train up its future workforce.
And then as compulsory schooling spread throughout the US, standardized testing also spread with it.
What's the answer to number 9?
And it really creates sort of this artificial version of learning.
You don't know what the word study means. You haven't the slightest idea.
So basically, test-produced data, a new standard we could use to rank students and schools against each other. And when the data is bad, the government gets involved.
In the noble cause of making sure no child is left behind.
No Child Left Behind. It changed everything. It was a law that held schools accountable for how students learned. And how do we measure that? You guessed it, testing.
That really supercharged standardized testing in the American schooling system.
And listen, No Child Left Behind was born out of data that looked really, really bad. The US was ranked 18th in math, 14th in science, and 15th in reading compared to the rest of the world. And while this new law held schools accountable for their students' learning, it also did something much more impactful. It punished schools if their students didn't improve their test scores.
There are no more excuses. And it's up to each local district to make sure it happens.
Even though the No Child Left Behind Act was eventually replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act, there is still this expectation of regular standardized testing. And the downside of that is that it really created a culture of teaching and testing. teachers and administrators were being held accountable to the government. It inevitably led to an environment in which teachers were teaching to a test, whether they wanted to or not.
This shift in accountability incentivized schools to cheat on tests too. In 2013, it was reported that 191 teachers in 70 DC public schools were changing test scores, even erasing wrong answers and replacing them with correct ones.
And so it sort of creates anxiety for kids. It creates this culture of doing well on a test, whether or not you're actually learning that information. Maybe you're just being tested on it and being able to regurgitate for that test, and then you're forgetting it.
And if a child is frightened by high-stakes testing, well, they're not alone. According to the National Institute of Health, studies show that anxiety over test taking will overwhelm the parts of the brain used for understanding, reading, and processing information. What I learned from that was that the higher a child's anxiety, the worse they'll do on a test, even if they really know the material. So do you think the answer is to just reduce the high-stakes aspect of tests and make them less anxiety-inducing?
Standardized testing measures a very narrow part of the human experience. And more parents are recognizing that. And they want an education system today that's more reflective of the personalization we enjoy in every other area of our lives, but that's been lacking in American education.
So if it's not test, what else is there?
You know, I think there's no one right way of approaching education. I think that's why so many more parents are excited about these emerging unconventional educational models, letting students' interests and passions guide a lot of that learning. That's not sort of forcing young people into a standardized box.
So Carrie pointed us in an interesting direction, but I needed to see for myself what some of these alternative methods look like in action. My crew and I went to two very different schools, a private school in Idaho and a public school in Fargo. The first place we visited was Onestone, which has no teachers, no tests, and no grades. Yet, they have a 100% graduation rate and, get this, 100% of students that want to go to college have gotten in. I needed to know how that was even possible. All right, so what we are headed to first is to meet this student named Lila. And she goes to the school that is entirely run by students, and I have absolutely no clue how it works. I was excited to hear from Lila because she went to a standard public school before Onestone, and I knew she'd have an interesting perspective to share.
My project is really to learn about testing. When was the last time that you took a test?
Oh man, the last time I took a test was probably the SAT. About a year ago.
Yeah.
Even though I don't do testing here every day, I can actually really succeed at that as well, because my skills transfer.
Well, I'm dying to see inside. Will you come show me around?
Yeah, of course.
All right. Wow. All right, so this is Onestone.
Yep, this is Onestone.
Today's National Day is National Hawaiian Shirt Day. Sam's got the best Hawaiian shirt on right now. Round of applause for that.
Over here is what we call the pods.
So Onestone is completely student-led and directed. They create their own schedules, curriculums, and even choose what they learn and how.
And what is the Foundry?
Yeah, the Foundry is our fully decked out makerspace. It's one of my favorite spots.
I feel like that's plenty big, honestly.
So tell me this, if students aren't taking tests here, how are they really measuring whether or not they're actually learning?
That's a good question. So, such a big part of it is my own self-reflection and then the feedback that I get from my peers and from my coach.
I would rewrite this with you in it instead.
And it takes a lot of time to develop. You don't come in here just knowing how to do that.
So I was a little skeptical of Lila's answer at first. After all, couldn't students use this as an excuse to give themselves a free pass? This school uses adult coaches to help students assess themselves. And so I talked with Lila's coaches to get a better idea of how this works.
So here is Ripple
cool.
Studios. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. Of course, it wouldn't be a Onestone studio if it wasn't started by students.
Onestone doesn't test its students. Why is that?
Well, I would say testing just shows this little snippet of educational knowledge that you are holding in your brain at one point. Testing doesn't show that you are an empathetic person. Testing doesn't show that you have passion. Testing doesn't show that you have curiosity. but we're trying to get every single student out into the real world ready to be an actual person.
Number 2, what is the derivative? Write it down.
Oh, what? They're winning.
We're on the same team.
I don't actually care if they pass the AP test. Like, that's not the thing that's driving me. I care if they're growing and they're growing at a pace that matches where they're at. And so, in addition to the stuff that they're learning in math, I'm paying attention to the fact, like, are you actually working hard? Are you collaborating with the other people in the group? Are you communicating when you need support? What were you thinking about? What did you look for when trying to decide what the antiderivative was? So it's more than just, are you finishing the assignments?
Lila explained to me that they have a way of tracking progress. It's called a growth transcript.
Our growth transcript is what we use to kind of like really visualize our learning and track it in that way.
I would love to take a peek at your growth transcript.
Yes, I would love to show you.
All right, cool.
A growth transcript is a document that the school uses to track her progress across 4 quadrants: knowledge, creativity, skills, and mindset. It's maintained by coaches, but Lila is deeply involved along the way. And yes, even without test scores, many colleges already accept this equally to a GPA.
So I actually submitted my application to Wellesley without any scores at all. All they had was my growth transcript and then some written feedback that my coaches had given me. And I was accepted. So I think it really goes to show that these schools are learning to look at students holistically and look at them, you know, not just as a number on a spreadsheet, but truly as like the human that they are.
My question for you is, how do you feel like you're better prepared for life after graduation because of your experience here at Winston?
Honestly, like I feel like everything comes back to owning my own learning and like being accountable. I feel like that's really at the root of who I am and who I try to be. So really like this just means a lot to me, and it gives me a lot of pride.
I thought this model was really inspirational, and it might even be the right environment for my son. But I know it isn't always the right fit for every kid, or that every family has the ability or budget to afford private school. Personally, I send my 3 kids to public school, and 90% of the students in this country go to public school also. So the question that I had was, is there an alternative that's even possible in public school? And to answer that question, we had to travel to Fargo, North Dakota.
Okay, it is just a little after 7 a.m. and it feels like it is way too early to be going to school.
Oh, look, there it is.
Oh, wow.
Northern Cass is a public school that serves an entire district of over 700 students. They have a 92% graduation rate, and 70% of their students go to college, while 20% enter the workforce and 10% enlist in the military. On the outside, this looks like thousands of other public schools across the country, but we heard that they were pioneering new ways to measure learning in their students. So to get to the bottom of it, I spoke with this guy.
Well, I think one of the things that's a little unique in our district is we're looking for demonstrations of learning.
This is Dr. Corey Steiner, the school superintendent. And 6 years ago, he started working with parents and local lawmakers to completely transform his public school to a model built around personalized education.
Taking a test used to be kind of the end-all be-all. 80% of your grade is tests, 20% are quizzes. Make sure you hand your homework in. It takes into account nothing about the real things that happen for a learner when they walk through our building.
But despite what he just said about tests, his school hasn't completely eliminated them.
We assess learning in a variety of different ways. And yeah, we still test kids. We have to do that by state law. But I'll tell you, here's what we know. It's more formative in nature. If a kid says, I don't want to take the test, I actually want to demonstrate and have a conversation with you, we do that. So we're looking at a growth model. And so the standardized test is just this small little sliver of their story. We're looking at the 98% of their story that gets written every single day with the experience they have here and outside of this building.
Corey told me that the secret ingredient was their use of a studio model, which allows the students to choose their own method of how they demonstrate what they're learning. I didn't understand it at first, so I asked a student to help me get what made it a different experience.
It gives us kind of control over our own learning, and it's more personalized. So it means a lot to me because I don't do well in like standard structures. Like I don't do well in classes where we have one homework sheet after another, but in studios and in personalized learning, I can take that more to my own interests.
Takeaways were.
The studio model at Northern Cass is a co-designed learning experience. It's a very independent process. It's a learner deciding, I want to learn this in this course. Here's the standards I want to grab. And then an educator sitting down beside them and saying, I'm going to help facilitate that, not teach it. I'm not going to grab the information. You are going to, as a learner, lead that. When you get stuck, I'm going to step in and I'm going to help.
So you have a lot more of a one-on-one based education style. I can talk one-on-one with teachers. So you're still learning the things that other people would, but it's not like 1 fact, 2 fact, 3 fact. It's a lot more of, here's kind of maybe an event in history, maybe some kind of concept, and I'm going to be taught in a way that best suits me and what is best for my interests.
Now remember, Corey told me earlier that his students still have to take state-mandated testing.
And yeah, we still test kids. We have to do that by state law.
And that made me wonder, wouldn't personalized learning hurt the students' results on state tests? But Corey showed me across the board that Northern Cass students are outperforming the state averages in science, math, and English.
We've given kids a lot of control and agency over their learning. A lot of places say they ask kids what they want to do, but not a lot of places listen. And I think that's one of the things we've done a really good job of in our transformation is when kids say it, we listen, because this is their place.
This has been especially impactful for reaching students like Justin. 2 years ago, he was considering dropping out of high school. He knew what he wanted. His path was to take over running his family's farm and caring for animals. But he didn't feel like his schoolwork really applied to his future.
It's all I really ever wanted to do. And most kids that grow up on a farm, but it's what you do.
Northern Cass helped Justin to reframe his school subjects to align with his passions and interests.
How does making horseshoes tie into your day-to-day education?
I had to tie a history standard into this. I researched the history of blacksmithing, and that covered my history standard. I basically made a business plan, a spreadsheet, about how much I'd spend, how much I'd make, and that covered my math standard.
Great.
This is what I'm going to do when I graduate.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a farrier, and Mr. Clapper's really helped me with figuring out a business plan.
Yeah.
How much it costs to make a shoe, how much it costs to get there, what I need to charge.
Uh-huh.
So that's what we've been working on the last, year? Yeah. Last year, just trying to get it so when I graduate, I can go start a business.
We recognize that every kid is different. And if you start with that in the forefront, you realize that the educational system has to honor that unique trait that every kid has, or unique traits, and you can't really make a cookie cutter style education to honor that. And so we try to offer as many opportunities to kids, chances for them to explore, find their interest areas, their passion areas. They can really explore themselves and find who they want to be when they walk out these doors.
I'll say, our system's not perfect, and that's kind of the fun of it, and sometimes the frustration of it is you're never at an endpoint in a personalized learning system because every kid that comes in is different and has different needs, so your system has to constantly evolve and adapt. And I think it allows us to reframe what we look at when we see a kid sitting in front of us. It's not a percentage, it's not a letter grade, it's a human being.
So when I started reporting on this, I expected for some of the innovators that I was talking to bash test taking. But what I learned is that tests can have a place in education.
The more important thing is, how are educators innovating to support the individual student? The models that are successful empower the unique interest and passions of their students and provide immediate feedback that they can act on, which is much more like real life.
It reminded me of something that June said at One Stone. Isn't testing just part of life? Like taking a test and the challenge of it and overcoming it. Isn't there something to be gained by doing that?
Is it? I remember the last job interview I ever had where I had to take a test to get a job, right? They interview you. They want to know more about you as a person. I think some of the shortcomings of traditional test taking is that we don't get to see a student's whole picture, right? You get an isolated instance of where a student can pour out knowledge onto a piece of paper. That doesn't give you their passions, that doesn't give you their curiosities, it doesn't give you any of their experience in life. And that is what makes a person, right?
One of the things that I admire about what Corey Steiner is doing at Northern Cass is that this is a public school that's built its personalized system from the ground up.
educators involving parents, talking to the students, and using research and science to create the best environment for learners. And if it can work for them, maybe we should be asking ourselves what's stopping us from reinventing learning at every public and private school in America. Stand Together partners with changemakers tackling our biggest challenges. To see more stories, follow our channels. And to learn more about how you can partner with us, go to standtogether.org.